Dipesh, welcome to the Stay Hungry podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, for these uninitiated listeners, who are you and what are they about to listen to?
I mean, your guess is as good as mine.
Oh, bro.
So, my name's Dipesh. I have, do you know what? I've always struggled with what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've done so many things and I've never really felt like I fit into a box of just doing one thing. So we can go through all my experience and the different levels of experience that I've had. But if I was going to sum it up in one way, I would just call myself a sales guy, which I used to hate saying, but I've come to terms with, and it's actually not as bad as it sounds.
Okay. Why did you used to hate saying that?
I think it's just the connotation of sales more than anything else, because sales always used to feel sleazy.
Okay.
You get you talk about sales and the first thing you think about is like typical American movie where you see the car salesman trying to push a car onto someone who doesn't want it. And I never wanted to be associated with that type of person. So for me, being in sales, even though I was good at it, always felt like it was a bad thing to do. And that was really the reason why I never wanted to be called that.
Yeah, I get that. So, I guess rewind back then. How did you end up in the sales space?
I think it comes from the simple need of money.
Okay.
So my first ever job, if you want to call it a job, was when I was 15 years old. And I was coming back home from school. So I used to take the train to school.
Yep.
On the way back, you come out the station in Harrow, which is where I grew up. And just outside the station, there was a shop there called Anglian Windows, which, for those people listening that don't know, Anglian Windows is one of those shop fronts that sells you doors, driveways, conservatories, windows for your home.
They're literally like the biggest window company in the UK,
One of the biggest, right? Yeah. I think their biggest competitor was like Zenith Windows back in the day.
Everest. And
exactly that. So we're walking back, and in the window of the shop front, it said staff wanted, and it was basically paying a commission of £15 back then. God, I'm trying to think how long ago was that? Quite a few years ago, over 20 years ago. So it was, it was paying £15 per appointment booked for any of the sales guys in the shop. And I was like, well, 15 quid is a lot of money for someone that didn't have any money.
And at 15 years old,
it was
in the early noughties.
Yeah.
Not to date you.
Thank you.
15 quid goes quite a long way then.
Definitely. Penny sweets used to be penny sweets back then.
So I told the team here that when I first bought my ever bag of pick and mix, you could get 4 sweets for a penny, and they didn't believe me. And I was like, that was a thing.
That's a generation gap right
there.
I walked by. It was me and 3 of my friends that were coming back from school. And I was like, well, why don't we just go in and find out what we have to do? So went in and met by this big guy who extremely intimidating when you walk into the shop. And you realise very quickly after he started talking, it's more like a gentle giant.
Yeah.
And
I like those kind of people.
Yeah. No, he terrifies you, but then he starts talking, and you're like, oh, this is a nice person to be around. And it was basically going around door to door in the evenings, 3 evenings a week, that he could make it work with our school timings and everything. Now looking back at it, I don't know if I'd ever feel comfortable accepting what we agreed to, but basically he was like, if you come and meet me here outside the shop at 5:45 p.m, you'll all come into my car, into my van. I'll drive you to the areas that we're going to be prospecting, so going around door knocking, and then when we finish at 9 p.m, I'll drive you back, and then whoever needs to pick you up from here can pick you up. And I just think it was a different time back then.
Yeah.
So we were like, oh, that sounds amazing. So there we are, going into a stranger's van. No contracts, no nothing. This was all like cash in hand back in the day. And it was interesting because we got given a few pointers on what we should be doing, how we should be approaching each door, what we should be saying. We didn't really have a full script, but more like a couple of questions just to try and get involved into a conversation with someone. you learn very quickly that people do not like kids knocking on your door between 6 and 9 p.m. on a
Well,
weekday
I was
evening.
about to say, like a 15-year-old knocking on your door in the evening, then essentially trying to sell you windows and doors
Mhm.
when you would assume that most 15-year-olds don't know much about windows and doors.
Oh, we knew nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. We knew absolutely nothing about what we were selling.
Okay.
The goal was to basically get into a conversation, and then just by using basic observation from the driveway walking up to the door, try and point out things that could be improved
Yeah.
and book an appointment that way for the sales guy to go over, and then the sales guy was going to sell whatever the sales guy was going to sell. And it was interesting because in my first week, I got 4 appointments booked. And then the next week, I got 6 appointments booked. And then I got another 6 appointments booked. And I was like, and I got paid weekly. So at the end of the week, I would get the cash.
You
And I
must
was
have
like,
felt rich.
I felt like a millionaire, honestly, because I just had money. So
Yeah,
if
yeah.
it meant that we were going to go out somewhere, or, back then, you'd go to a rave or whatever.
A rave at 15? That's disgraceful.
This is what happens in Northwest London. So just the idea of being able to buy like alcohol from the off license or whatever it was
Yeah, at 15.
at 15, we knew all the off licenses to go to. There's a lot of stuff coming out of here which I didn't even expect to talk
Yeah.
about, but here we are. So, but this is life. This is what it's about, right? And just the ability to buy those things made me feel so good.
Yeah.
And that's essentially how I started selling.
Got the bug.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm interested to know when you're knocking on doors, like if I was to do that around here at 15 years old, and I'm from like a working class background, some of the houses around here are quite posh, I'd have got told to fuck off quite frequently. And that's putting it nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the worst experience you had?
God, I got told to fuck off. I've had doors slammed in my face. I've had people screaming through the door without even being open. So I've had someone look through the letterbox to see who was there, and they see me. I'm still wearing my school suit. That's how I was going around because I didn't have a suit or anything like that that I would have worn to go to this job.
Yeah.
And that was like for me the smartest thing I could have gone out in. And I've had people literally open the letterbox and just start screaming.
Wow.
And just telling me to get off their property. So you realize very quickly that not only do people not like you knocking on their door, but I think it gives you a real experience of what it's like to be rejected, because people talk about rejection in sales all the time. And I feel like people don't really know what rejection is until you've had someone screaming at you. I think that's when you start to realize, oh, these people really don't like me.
So this has sort of sprung something for me. So I've just been in America with all sorts of different people. Some in business, some not, some collectors, some not. And there was a guy with us. He's 21, relatively shy, modest lad, and he likes watches. And because of his fascination with watches, he got into NFTs. Ended up going to this thing in America. But he has a real worry about rejection. So his love life's not been great because he has a worry about rejection, and he doesn't always get involved in the things he wants to be involved in because he's worried about his rejection. I said to him, what if you just decided that you'd been rejected already? And he said, what do you mean? And I was like, well, and to be honest, we were actually trying, he had a night in San Diego after we left, and we were trying to encourage him to have a fun night. So I said to him, well, no one here knows you. You're already in a position of rejection because it's a no now because you're not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you just go out and see how many times you can get rejected? Because eventually someone will say yes. And he didn't get that. But it's interesting to know your take on that kind of mentality.
I think it's necessary to have that mentality because otherwise you can get so shut off from the idea of doing anything.
Yeah.
Because fear of being rejected will stop you before you've made any traction that you could have had if you just took a small step in that direction. Our instruction was, and they did tell us that people might not like it, They didn't say that you were going to get sworn out or anything like that, because I
Yeah.
don't think anyone would have taken the job if they'd pre-framed it with that.
Yeah, yeah.
They were like, people may not like it, but all you have to do is walk away from that door, recenter yourself, smile, and walk to the next door. That was it. And it's almost like my first lesson in how to get past rejection, which is it's probably going to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
So don't worry about it. Smile, move on.
Yeah.
And I think that's the lesson. So, I mean, I'm hoping this guy took your advice.
He didn't.
Oh,
He didn't. So, because I said to him when I got on the plane, I said, like, when this plane lands, I want my phone to be lit up with how many times you've been rejected.
And it didn't light up once.
No, because I went for a meal in Little Italy on my own. I was like, oh, okay. But he's a good lad. And what I was sort of trying to say to him, because he sells watches, I was like, you must get rejected all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, yes, but when I get rejected, the people were interested in the first place. So there is some like back and two.
Mm-hmm.
They come to him, he doesn't go to them.
Right.
And I was like, because it's like high-end watches.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, okay, well, in my game, in marketing, very often I have to go to them. And so I get rejected all the time. And he was like, well, how do you cope with that? And I was like, well, it doesn't matter.
I think it's, number one, it doesn't matter. But also, you're probably not going to speak to that person again if you get rejected anyway.
Yeah.
So then why do you care?
Yeah.
And I think that's the point that hangs people up the most. It used to hang me up a lot as well, because I used to think, oh, are these people going to think badly of me? Am I going to get seen as someone who is not a good person? That's probably where my mindset was a lot of the time. And it took me a long time, because yes, I would smile. Yes, I'd go to the next door, but I'd still be thinking about the people that rejected me.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, what did I do wrong? Why did they react that way? And then I think there's a point where you come to realize, and maybe it just comes with experience, and maybe it just comes with as you get older as well, that whatever someone's reaction is to you is because of whatever they've got going on in their life, and it actually has nothing to do with
You're not the main character
Yeah,
in that
unless-
story. Yeah.
unless you're someone who purposely went and tried to agitate someone, in which case, fine, maybe you're a bit of a dick and that's the reason why you got a reaction. But if you're not doing that, and if you're just kind of getting on with your life,
Yeah.
you're doing your job that you've been asked to do, and someone has an adverse reaction, it might not have anything to do with you. The chances are it has probably got nothing to do with you. And I think that's where, if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking about either getting into sales, or they want to run a business, or they want to, this applies to even if you're going for a promotion, mate. Like, you could want to, let's just say you're at an executive level and you want to go to senior exec, or you want to go to like C-suite level in a organization. You are going to have to sell yourself to the person that is responsible for making that decision on the hiring front.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people fail to see that they're like, oh, so-and-so got promoted and they don't work anything like as hard as I do. So yeah, but they sell themselves a lot harder than you do.
That's it. It's exactly that.
And I think that's the same for marketing agencies, sales agencies, accountants.
Do you know that phrase where people go, there's a people that are a lot less smarter than you making way more money, or a lot more successful than you?
Yeah.
I don't think it has anything to do with whether someone's smarter or not. I think it's whether someone's able to sell themselves better.
Yeah.
Because you could be extremely smart and you can be extremely good at sales. You'll still get the result.
Yeah,
You could be half as smart and be extremely good at selling yourself and still create success. So it's just about how much you're willing to put yourself out there. And more specifically, it's about how much you're willing to allow yourself to go through rejection to get the yes from someone that was always there, but maybe you have to go through the first 5, 10, 15 rejections.
Literally what I was saying to this lad, you've got to buy a ticket to win the raffle.
Yeah.
And he was like, he just sort of taking the piss. and to an extent I was, but nothing I said was untrue. And it's interesting. So how did you sort of, I mean, I guess an interesting question would be, how did your parents react to you knocking on doors at 15 years old around some sketchy areas of London?
So I didn't tell them that I'd applied to work with these guys, and I didn't tell them that it was basically a yes while we were there.
Oh, good. So they thought you were selling drugs.
Luckily, I think because of the school that I was going to and the people that I was around, they were like, oh, I'm around like
good people.
good people.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, I was not selling any drugs.
It would have been lucrative.
It would have been extremely lucrative, probably
Yeah.
more so than the 15 quid for the appointments. But I think it was more a case of back then we had a business in the family, and I don't think it was anything. Actually, I'm trying to remember. I don't think it was anything off with what I'd chosen to do. It was more like, oh, okay, then go and see what it's like.
And what was the family business?
The family business back then used to be a pharmacy.
Okay.
So dad's a pharmacist, and he had a pharmacy. He sold that years ago. But it was interesting to see that they weren't really opposed to it. And from my mum's side, she's been quite used to entrepreneurship generally, because my family from my mum's side and my dad's side grew up in East Africa, and everyone had businesses. No one really had jobs. It was
I forgot the East Africa connection, because I mean, I need to provide some context now, but I was joking about how I've been to East Africa with you when we were away somewhere, and you just thought I was lying. And
I did think you're lying. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's all good. But yeah, that is crazy to think how many different ways we're connected.
Yeah.
But it was, so family grew up in East Africa.
Yep.
They've all had businesses. So like my great granddad used to be a jeweler, and used to spend a lot of time in Hatton Garden, actually.
Oh, wow.
So going
traveling
around, back into, and then when he was living here as well, traveling a lot between Leicester, Croydon, and Hatton Garden.
Yeah.
So literally buying and selling diamonds and gold. So business, I think, has always been inherent in my family.
What's that like? Because like I don't come from an entrepreneurial family. The first person in my family to have their own business was my uncle, but that's not directly connected, if you see what I mean. So what's it like to grow up in that environment?
I think it's a lot of openness to allowing you to kind of try new things, and also having a lot of flexibility and freedom to make up your own decisions. I say that as, I would say that's 50% true, because the other 50% is I'm Indian and I come from an Indian background. So
and my dad has a pharmacy.
And my dad has a pharmacy.
Yeah.
So the stereotype of, what you should study, what you should do to be successful, that's still there.
So there's pressure.
Correct. So it's like, are you going to become an optician, a pharmacist, a doctor, a dentist, or are you going to go into finance, or are you going to become a lawyer? Like, those conversations are still there. So on one side, yes, you've got a bit more like, oh, you're kind of free to go and try things out, but try them out
within the
bounds of these things that are seen as successful professions.
And what's that like in terms of the pressure and maybe the frustration around, well, actually, I want to be in a heavy metal band, or like whatever it might be? I
was in a band back in school. We did start one. It wasn't heavy metal. To be honest, we weren't very good either. So that's all we're going to say about that. That pressure is tough, because I won't go into too much detail into this, but we had a lot of issues just as a family between my parents when we were growing up.
Yeah.
So the way that I distracted myself from that was to basically be a bit of a rebellious dick.
Okay.
That was my way of coping with it. So the best way that I back then thought was, this is how I can get my own back, or this is how I can feel like I'm winning, was to basically go against everything my parents thought was the right thing.
Yeah.
So that led to me, when I went to university, first of all, it led to me choosing to basically not really study for my A-levels.
Okay.
Back then, to the point where I think before one of my exams, I decided to have my mate over or go to his house, I can't remember which, and we decided to play Pro Evo, the football game.
I know what Pro Evo is.
So I decided to play that until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Number
before
9.
An exam.
Give it to number 9 and boot it.
That's it. That's how we used to do it, and then chip the keeper if you managed to get enough of a distance. It was my way of basically going, I don't care about anything that anyone said that is good for me, because this is what I believe is going to be good for me. And obviously it wasn't. It was stupid. But that's how I did it, and that's how I coped with that kind of stress and pressure.
Yeah.
So I didn't do great in my A levels. I had to go through clearing to get into uni. I got into uni to do electronic engineering.
Yeah.
And I passed my first year and everything. But in my second year, I think a part of me was still quite angry more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I just used that as an excuse to basically go, I don't like this, I don't want to do this. And I dropped out. And that's how I dealt with the pressure. And it's not the way that I would advise anyone to deal with the pressure of anything. You know, again, with age, with experience, I could have talked to so many people about it. I could have just been open with what I was feeling, but I didn't really know how to do that back then.
What was the like family fallout of dropping out of university? Because I think the optics on that must have been tricky.
It was not great.
Yeah.
It was not great. However, I've always been a little bit scrappy, so I
Yeah.
found a way to kind of justify why it was the right choice.
Yeah.
So in doing so, and this is probably where my my version of smarts comes in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in doing so, I lined myself up, thanks to my wife in the background here. I lined myself up with a job with RBS, the Royal Bank of
Mhm.
Scotland, and I managed to get a job with them in private banking.
Okay.
I still don't know to this day how I managed to get that job, because from what I remember, it was an apprentice scheme. There were over 3,000 applicants and 12 people got selected across the country to work within their branches in private banking. I was one of the lucky ones. And it was, in my head, before I even started this job, I was thinking, oh, I'm working in private banking. This is going to be a job in finance. Maybe this is going to be similar to things like trading and
Yeah.
like what you see on the movies. It's a very well disguised sales job.
Yeah.
And what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is basically calling up clients who have potential for private banking or who are in private banking. And what you're trying to do is basically sell a loan or a card or a savings account to
Yeah.
basically help the bank grow.
Yeah. So this is like the RBS NatWest Coops
Correct.
group, right?
Exactly.
So yeah. Yeah, and I think what people don't realise, to get to qualify for private banking, you have to have a certain level of income anyway, or to be able to prove
Yeah.
a certain level of wealth goes through your accounts, and therefore you become an easy target essentially.
100%. And that was basically what I was doing. So to answer your question about how the optics looked, it wasn't just I'm dropping out of uni and not doing anything. I'm leaving uni because I've now got myself
A really
an
good
amazing career, and that's what I'm now going to do.
Okay, so actually the optics were pretty good.
The optics looked amazing.
Yeah.
In reality, it wasn't. But for that moment in time, even I thought, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be so much better than going to uni.
Yeah. I mean, I always found that difficult. Like, I didn't go to a particularly good university, but I was one of the first from my family to go to uni.
Mm.
And I always thought to myself, like, if I drop out, like, this could be catastrophic. But the amount of people at uni that do drop out, especially our generation, because like we were the first generation where nearly everybody goes to uni.
Yeah.
And so it's more like college now. It's
Yeah.
kind of like, well, actually, this doesn't suit me. I'm off.
It's a lot more, I think it was a lot more taboo
Yeah.
in terms of what we were doing with the idea of dropping out. And it is interesting because I did go back to uni a little bit later,
Yeah.
because then I think the pressure of like what society wanted and what I deemed was still successful or not successful, and then what my parents thought was successful or not successful, and me trying to live up to that expectation as well. I did end up going back to uni, but this time I did it slightly differently. So I did RBS for a little while.
Yep.
I ended up leaving that role, and then decided I was going to go back to uni. And this time I was going to choose the subject and the topic that I wanted to do. And it wasn't based on what I thought was going to be successful.
Mm.
It wasn't based on what was available to me through clearing. It was what I'd chosen. And that's why I did accounting and finance.
Okay.
And the reason I chose it was, again, because it's what I thought would be successful, because all my friends were working in finance by that time.
Yeah.
So that's literally the only reason I went into it.
And what's the truth of the matter?
Well, I realised in my second year that I don't want to be an accountant. So, um, which was extremely frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm really thankful for the experience of doing it, because now when I work with businesses, or if I'm consulting with someone, or someone's asking me for help with what they're going through, I can understand things from a sales point of view, so like front end of the business, but I can also understand things from the back end
Balance
of the
sheet.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I can understand like what makes that business tick, where is it spending too much money, which you think would be basic knowledge, but actually having been through all of that experience, it has made it more basic and common for me,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's actually not
Oh,
so
most
common.
business owners don't understand it.
Yeah,
So like that's exactly why I did accounting. Was I wanted to understand the balance sheet, profit and loss, how to reconcile, because I knew they were skills that would pay me well throughout the rest of my life.
yeah,
Because I can literally do things with clients now, and they'll be like, "This isn't making me any money." And I'm like, "It's making you loads of money." Well, you talk all the opposite. They'll be like, "I'm making loads of money at the moment." I'm like, well, "Hang on, let's
mm,
just have a look at the margins here." Blah blah blah. No, you're not.
exactly. And this is when, like, you can get caught up with vanity metrics like top
Mm.
line revenue and stuff like that, and you get a real sense of what I would now call a true story of what's happening in a
Yeah.
business when you understand the sales side of things as well as the accounts side of things, because that's going to tell you whether a business is profitable or not. That's going to tell you whether a business, how long a business has left to survive with how much cash it's got in the bank. It tells you if that business was ever going to be acquired in the future,
Yeah.
what kind of money you might be looking at to have that business acquired based on how that business is run. So I think it gives you so many insights. So I'm grateful for the experience. I just decided that I didn't want to be the person doing the books.
Yeah.
And that was what happened there. So again, pretty difficult conversation with the parents afterwards to go, yep, I'm in uni, but I don't want to do this either.
Did you finish that time?
I did. I did.
Okay.
So I finished it because it was my choice to get into it. And
Yeah.
I think that's what really pushed me to just see it through. And more than anything else, I didn't want to go through another situation where I'd gone, I quit again.
Yeah.
I wanted to prove to myself, more than anything, I wanted to prove to myself, especially after my A levels, that I wasn't stupid.
Okay.
Because I think when you fail, or not fail, when you don't pass with as high grades as everyone else, there's a lot of stuff that goes through in your mind.
Yeah.
You go,
Yeah.
am I just thick? Am I like just not meant to study? Am I never going to amount to anything in my life? And maybe it just comes down to an entirely broken system, because that's how everyone judges whether you're clever or not, which is your ability to memorize
Ability to
certain
pass the
things.
test. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But back then, when you're in the thick of it, it
That's
doesn't.
all you know.
Yeah, yeah. You don't really know anything else. And for me, I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't stupid,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I ultimately saw it through. It wasn't to do anything else. It was just to prove that I could pass.
Nice. I think there's a lot of kind of like resilience building in that as well, where like sometimes you just have to do things that you don't want to do to prove to yourself that you can do it.
Exactly that.
I mean, I think a lot of people who are very successful do that every day.
Well, it's the skill you have to master,
Yeah.
because what you end up realizing is that no matter what you do in life, there's going to be stuff that you absolutely do not want to do
Yeah. Yeah.
every single day,
Yeah.
single day without fail. So the more this is why the whole like cold shower thing or
Yeah.
like cold plunge thing works so well. No one wants to get into an ice cold bath, feel like they're being
It's mind over matter,
yeah.
right?
You feel like you're being stung from like 1,000 different places,
Yeah.
and sometimes the water can wind you just from how cold it is, and you lose all your breath. No one really wants to put themselves through that unless you get past that point of not wanting to do it and forcing yourself to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then you realize the mental benefit that it has for you, and you realize that actually, if you can do that thing which is excruciating and hard and difficult and painful, and you can put yourself through it and get through to the other side, and then you receive all the health benefits, etc., that come from it, then what else can you do?
Yeah. Yeah. I had this exact conversation with someone the other day, and because there's a lot of discussion around, is there actually any health benefits from ice baths at the moment, and is there any actual health benefits from infrared and blah 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 blah. And I said, well, it doesn't really matter. And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you can get in a cold shower or an ice bath in the morning for 2 minutes every day when it's the last thing you want to do, the only way is up from there.
Yeah.
So the psychological benefit is massive anyway. So it doesn't matter if a scientist tells you that actually it's not improving your muscle health or like your joint health or whatever. There's other benefits.
Definitely, even if it's just a placebo effect,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Because you can benefit so much from just the idea that something is working.
Yeah.
So if you go around then believing every single day that something's working for you, then that's how you start to see things.
100%. And the other bit of like, if you have a bit of adversity in the day, something that's just niggling you, but earlier in the day you're in a 6 degrees ice bath, you're probably going to cope a bit better with the adversity. And it's just like working on your tolerances.
Mm-hmm.